Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Getting Started with Dataflow Automation. My name is MJ Niscoda and I'll be your host, and your presenter today will be Jonathan Su. And it's that time of year again, I can't believe I'm saying this, but our 4th annual Power User Summit is coming up September 13th here in Herndon, Virginia at the CIT building. For those that have come in the past, it's a great experience to talk with our power users, talk with the team, meet the folks that you talk to via email and phone calls. For anyone that doesn't know what this is, essentially every year we try to get this meeting together that different power users can come in and see how they've evolved the platform. With the new things that we're coming out with, we're really excited this year. This will be kind of the first year we can talk with some of the users that have been able to dive into Dataflow, dive into reports and documents and things of that nature. And again, it's just a great day to come meet the team. If there's questions, if there's features you'd like to learn more about, it's that time to have one-on-one training and one-on-one conversations with the team. A couple updates. Obviously, the Power User Summit's coming up, and we also have our Form Builder certification coming up on October 3rd and October 5th. For anyone that hasn't been through this, it's a great way to kind of dive headfirst into the platform, learn the Form Builder, how to assign forms out, and how to really get your arms around the Form Builder itself. There's been a lot of changes over the past year or so, so if you are brand new or you haven't been really diving into the new Form Builder, it's something that I would definitely recommend. John, I'm going to turn it over here to you. We do have a couple upcoming webinars, and John will be able to shed some more light on those.
Yep, thanks, MJ. So hi, everybody. Good afternoon. And like MJ said, I am your presenter, Jonathan Su. I'm going to start off by talking about some of these upcoming webinars. Since I'm going to be the one who's organizing them, I figured it's best that I go ahead and tell you what they're all about. So on September 7th, we're going to have a webinar about common JavaScript and form building. This is a topic that I see asked about quite frequently. I think that this is also one of the common hurdles that people have to overcome when it comes to starting your basics in form building, and when you want to progress to making those truly dynamic forms. That's one of the main reasons we see a lot of people sign on with us, and then learning how to write those forms can take some time. What I want to do is show people a lot of common JavaScript techniques I use in my form building, things I see pop up frequently, and hopefully that will allow you to then use them on your own projects. The next webinar we're going to have is going to be towards the end of the month, again, because we have that Power User Summit in the middle of the month. We're going to be pretty busy. But at the end of September, on the 27th, we're going to have a webinar about Zerion documents and reports. Now, the purpose of this webinar is because we do offer 2 services under the Zerion Web Services umbrella called documents and reports. For a lot of people who are unfamiliar with these, the terms tend to be used interchangeably, but we do have a distinction between them, where documents are going to be things like generated PDFs, and reports are going to be dashboards and visualizing your data as a whole. And so we want to talk about the differences between the 2 of them, the reasons for having each one of them, and then how you can use them to enhance your own workflows. So those are going to be the 2 webinars that we have coming up next month. Now, before I jump into today's current topic on introducing and getting started with Dataflow Automation, so the purpose of this webinar is to get people started with Dataflow Automation. Now, this is not going to be a step-by-step, how do I make a Dataflow webinar. One of the things that we've gotten feedback on as of late is that Dataflow Automation is a very flexible, it's a very powerful tool, but neither of those words are going to make Dataflow particularly easy to grasp initially. So what I wanted to do today is take a high-level view of Dataflow Automation, talk about it from the perspective of why it is, why we have it, and then also how it is used to solve problems. After that, we will do a little bit of an overview of how the service works, and then I want to end with some sample data flows that I've built before to help you get an idea of how it may be able to be implemented in your own current workflows. Now, I will say that at the end of the webinar, we are going to have another quick poll asking if you want additional information about Dataflow. Dataflow happens to be it's a particularly strong passion of mine, and so if there's anything about this webinar, anything you would like to learn more about, or have some help getting it fitting into your own particular context, let us know, and I'll be happy to sit down and talk with you about that. So to start off, let's talk about why Dataflow Automation exists. The purpose of Dataflow Automation was to really solve a particular problem that we saw in data processing. So we've historically done iForm Builder and then now Data Collector, and we've been we've done well in the mobile data collection sphere. We've also seen a lot of people use services such as Tableau, Flipfolio, or Zoho reports in order to visualize that data that they collected with us. The problem is there's a middle piece that was missing, and that is the massaging and the manipulating of your data in order to get it into those fancy reporting tools. So I wanted to talk about this mismanagement of data management. Funnily enough, we call this a tale of two hells sometimes. We have your Excel hell and then SQL hell. And both of these become problems that organizations have once they start collecting these robust sets of data, but they don't have a way to get it in the right format to display. Microsoft Excel, or really any sort of spreadsheeting software, and then SQL and any of those incantations are two of the extremes that we see when it comes to data management and operating within that middle space. Each one of them does things particularly well, but they also have some pretty glaring weaknesses when it comes to working within a workflow, and I want to talk about those a little bit. So the first thing with SQL, which stands for Structured Query Language, is that it is a databasing tool that will allow you to store massive amounts of data. The problem is, as you store that data, it does scale well. However, the syntax in order to pull out the data in a format you need becomes increasingly difficult, exponentially, in fact. So as your data matures, so too does your requirement to hire DBAs in order to write these custom queries that are normally a lot of times going to be one-ofs. You write this one custom query, and then they need to go in and change something very slightly for the next chart or the next graph that they need to get the data for in order to display. So you run into this scenario where you have this high level of complexity in order to get the data that you want. Additionally, these people who have been brought on as DBAs are no longer really administrators or architects of the database structure. They're really just trying to retrieve data and write these queries in order for the higher level supervisors to use. Now, on the other hand, we will talk about Excel, and Excel is going to be more along the lines of an individual reporting tool. So we're not talking about having a massive SQL server to hold millions of records. We're talking about smaller spreadsheets in using Excel. Now, I don't know about you all, but I've done reports in Excel before, and the process sounds something like this, where you have all your data as a CSV, you upload it, or you copy and paste it into a worksheet. Then you have to make another worksheet where you take a subset of that data, copy and paste it in, maybe run some calculations. You take another set of that, you copy and paste it, and you slowly work down and funnel towards the data in a way you want it, and then you create that chart or that graph. So you have this step-by-step process, which in some ways is good because each step itself is not too complex. The problem is this is not a repeatable solution. Moreover, this is not a scalable solution. As you start to get more data, Excel very quickly becomes unable to handle a large amount of data. So you have two ends and two extremes with each of these different data management tools. One thing they do share in common, though, is that they force you into a tabular structure. So if you think about your standard spreadsheet where you have a column and then you have rows, SQL works the same way where it has data tables. What happens is this is going to bottleneck you, or it will pigeonhole you into having two-dimensional data only, where you can only have an X and a Y axis. You do not have any levels of depth to your data. For those of you who are experienced form builders and have worked with us before and have used subforms, you'll know what I mean, where you may have a secondary form that is referenced and can be filled out multiple times, and that's going to give you a layer of depth where a single parent can have multiple children. Now, these three problems sum up the space in which Dataflow Automation was born and the reason why it was created. So with Dataflows, we're able to solve these problems. When you work inside of Dataflow Automation, you're able to set up these incremental Excel-style problem-solving scenarios where you're moving from one node to another node and setting up the instructions at each step along the way. Where Dataflow surpasses Excel is that once you set up these instructions in these steps, it's repeatable. You're also able to have it scale. It can handle millions of records. But the best part about this is that it's going to be automated. So once you set these instructions up, each time new data comes in, it's going to run through those series of instructions, and is going to execute in its entirety. So what this is going to do is it's going to give you the procedural benefits of Excel with the scalability and the automation of SQL. And the best part about all of this, additionally, is that Dataflow is also going to allow for unstructured data. Now, this term can be a little bit confusing. It may be brand new for a lot of you all. But unstructured data is going to mean that when you put data into a Dataflow, it does not have a pre-configured template for what that data is supposed to look like. If you've ever worked with SQL or any other sort of database software, you know that you have to define columns with a name and a data type. Or if you work within Excel, you're also going to have columns in a particular order, and each one is going to have a certain type of data that your validation and other tools may be working off of. In Dataflow Automation, your data can be unstructured. You can send data from one source and in from another source, and then what you can do is inside of the Dataflow, you can refine your data, you can standardize it, but it does allow for that unstructured nature of data. And in a world where data needs are ever increasing and becoming ever more demanding, the ability to handle multiple types of data structures is really important. Now, I do want to stop real quick here, MJ. I did want to ask if there have been any questions or if there's anything I can clarify for anybody.
So far, John, not any questions have come in.
All right, thanks a lot. So now that we've talked about, why Dataflow exists, the problems that it's meant to address, and then the value that it's supposed to bring in terms of problem solving, let's talk about how a Dataflow actually functions. So a quick primer on Dataflow Automation. What you have here in this slide is a screenshot of a Dataflow. You'll notice that there are a bunch of circular objects. We do call those actually Dataflow objects. Sometimes you can see them referred to as being a node as well, or a stop along the Dataflow. Now, each one of these objects is going to have a particular responsibility inside of the Dataflow. So it handles 1 to 2 tasks per object. This is, again, giving you that procedural step-by-step path towards problem solving. Now, data is always going to move from left to right across your Dataflow, so you're never going to have a Dataflow that begins on the right-hand side, for example, over here. It's always going to start on the left, and it will move towards the right. With these objects, you'll see that there are 3 different background colors to them, and those colors are going to be an indicator as to the responsibility of each object. Now, in a broad sense, any objects that have this teal-colored background are going to be responsible for accepting data. So this particular object is called a webhook. If any of you have worked with data integration across multiple services before, you may be familiar with that term. Think of a webhook as a mailing address for your data flow. If you want to send in data to the data flow, you point it towards the webhook. The webhook will then retrieve the data and then allow it to run through the data flow. From the webhook, we move towards the right into these blue colored objects. These are going to be your record sets, and record sets are really the heart and soul of a data flow. The first thing I want to note is that the record sets are the only type of object on my screenshot where there are 2 of them. The other one, there's only a single webhook, and then to the right, you'll have a single action is what those are called. So your record sets are going to be used to do a lot of different things. The primary responsibilities are you want to be able to store data in each record set. You also want to be able to refine data in the record set. Now, there's 3 main ways of refining data. You have your filter, your transform, and your aggregation. Filtering data is going to be similar to sorting records. You can say this record is allowed in, this record is not allowed in, but we're not changing anything fundamentally about the data itself. So that's how a filter works. On the other hand, a transformation is where you are going to be manipulating the data, but you're not saying this one's in, this one's out. The set of instructions you write, which is going to be called your transform code, will be applied to every record that enters the record set. So it's a predefined set of instructions. Think of this as being similar to standardizing the process you go through in Excel when you are changing the data or restricting the rows. That type of a transformation would be done inside of a record set here. The third refinement technique is going to be your aggregation. And an aggregation is different than the former 2 because an aggregation looks at the entire set of data. A filter or a transform is going to be on a per record basis or a per row basis, where you look at one record and say, this is in or out, or you take one record and you apply a set of changes to it. With an aggregation, you're going to take all the records in the record set using your entire data, and you're going to create new values from that. You may want to calculate the average of a particular property, or you may want to figure out the total number of records in the record set, or you may even want to merge values together. You may want to have two record sets merge into a single record. These are all examples of aggregation. For those of you who have done form building before, you may be familiar with the subform aggregation functions sum and average. These can be replicated inside of a data flow as well. Now, the final object here on my screen on the right has a yellow background, and you'll see that these are called action objects, and they're responsible for distributing data. Now, what I mean by distributing data is that normally what's going to happen in a data flow is you take in data, you're going to store and refine it, but at the end of the day, you really want to do something with that data. So you're normally sending it now out of the data flow. These actions determine where you're sending that data to. And also the nature of actions sending the data out after the webhook has accepted the data in brings us to a lot of times describe data flows as being a data pipe. So it pipes from your iForm Builder account or your data collector account into reports, into documents, into an email server, or into a SQL table. But having that connection set up, you're allowed to have a pipe that's not just a standard, point A to point B pipe. You're able to do a lot of things in between, and that's where the real benefit of Dataflow Automation comes in. Now, for these actions, you're able to set them up where you can have a lot of different conditions. So if you think about a reports table, you could have each record either do an insert to the table, you could have it delete from the table, you could do an update or an update or insert. Just like any other sort of databasing tool, you're able to set all of these configurations up inside of a data flow. Now, the next thing I want to do is, now that you have been introduced to Dataflow Automation, is let's talk about some actual use cases and how Dataflow has brought value to the particular workflow. We'll keep with this screenshot, and we're now going to change the overlay. So to give you a little bit of context in this data flow, what we were doing here is we were trying to solve the problem of taking a subform and connecting it to the parent data in order to be put into a reports table, so a dashboarding, spreadsheeting tool. What we ended up doing was, in the data flow, we took that record with its subform data, and we did what's called a flatten, where we're taking the parent and the child, and we're now merging them together, so there's one level. Basically, all of the child data moves to the parent level, and that's done with a single function, actually. It's done with a single command. It's very simple to do. Once you have all of those records, both parent and child data combined, you then send it over to reports. Because you have your data now flat, it can fit into a tabular structure. So the big benefit here is that we're going from a form with subform records. Again, that is going to be a data structure that has depth to it. You have your parent level, and then you go down a level into the child. We're going to flatten it to a single level. And then from there, because we have shaped the data to fit into a table, we send it to reports. So Dataflow is going to solve the problem of restructuring your data in this scenario. It's also going to solve the problem of making sure that your reports tables are always up to date. If you've worked with Excel, sometimes what will happen is you'll need to do manual downloads of your iForm Builder data, and then you do an insert or an import into Excel. But what happens is you don't get the data until you do that import. Moreover, if you look at that same report later on, you don't have an up-to-date picture of what's going on. It's only since your last import or insert. Working with a web-enabled tool like Zerion Reports, you're able to see the table in its current real-time synchronized status. So what that means is, because of the automation done inside of the data flow, as soon as a record is submitted and synced, it'll also run through the data flow, be added to the reports table, and then when viewed, you would see it instantly. Moving down to my next example, Dataflow. This one you're going to see it branches here. And so this is going to bring up another benefit of Dataflow automation, and that is the ability to have your Dataflow itself model or mimic your workflow. This means that you're not always going to have just a straight pipe. You may have your pipe branch. You might have your pipe merge later on as well. Now in this particular scenario, what was going on is the Dataflow was tasked with doing two things. The Dataflow was tasked with generating a lot of calculations and some derived values, and it was also tasked with creating a PDF and having that delivered to a cloud storage platform. For those of you form builders who have worked with page-level JavaScript or who have worked with dynamic values and other smart controls that are required for calculations and those types of processes, what I've started doing is I've actually started using Dataflow to do those processes after the fact. So the data collector or the form only has fields that are required for actual data collection. I don't have to add all of my hidden elements. I don't have to add all of my placeholder elements to pass values back and forth between parent and subform. None of that is needed to be done. Instead, what happens is all of those steps are done after the record is synced. So it's a post process. Now you might think, well, I want that actual data in my record in iForm Builder. And that's perfectly valid. I understand why. That makes sense. I would want it there too. For that reason, what I've done in this data flow is you'll see this top branch. This is an action object that connects to an iForm Builder account. When I configured this action, what I set it up to do was to update a record based on the ID. So what I'm getting is a record comes in after having the ID generated. It gets post-processed here in my transform. And using that ID, it's going to update the record on iForm Builder with the new calculated values. So the takeaway here is that the data you have in your iForm Builder account is going to look the exact same, but with a fraction of the elements, not having to worry about page-level JavaScript on your device, not having to worry about differences in the operating system. And if you need to make the changes, you can do so in Dataflow, which is going to be a more open space. It's actually a little bit more powerful than working inside a page-level JavaScript. Now, on the other hand, we also have this bottom branch where once your record has been post-processed and you have all of the data in the way you want it, you're now able to generate a PDF and then send that to cloud storage using Zerion documents. Now, one of the cool things about this data flow and part of that post-processing is you're able to get your record or your data integration ready is the way I like to describe it. So what does that mean? Sometimes getting something integration ready can mean removing metadata. Other times it could mean taking that date and formatting it in a particular way. If you all are familiar with the iForm Builder metadata, the date and time are displayed in different ways sometimes. Sometimes you will get a standard for the year, month, day, hour, minute, seconds. Other times you're going to get a UTC timestamp. Neither of those are particularly easy to read, especially when it comes to printing documents and generating documents. So for that reason, inside of Dataflow, it's very common that what we'll see is people will format their dates in a way that is easier to read or more appropriate for the document or report that they're generating. And going back to the idea again of the data flow being automated, this all happens seamlessly and behind the scenes. So it's not like I have to tell something, I don't have to tell the data flow, hey, do this work. I've set up my process, I've set up my instructions so that as soon as a record is synced, it will be processed and updated, as well as create that PDF and send it to my cloud storage without any instruction by myself. Now, MJ, I did notice that the question mark popped up in the GoToWebinar. Is this a question that I'd be able to expand upon, or is this something that you've got?
We do actually have two questions, John. First, we did have one attendee lose audio. Is everyone else still able to hear? If you can you please type into the question or chat box? Also, John, the other question that we have is, you've been talking, try to sum up the question here. You've been talking a lot through how data flows through here. It can be flattened, different actions can take place and stuff like that. Is this just a pass-through tool, or can this be used as long-term storage? Do I have to rerun the data every time? What's that kind of look like?
It's a really good question. So Dataflow Automation takes on a couple of different facets. One, it can be used as long-term storage. Now, there are a couple of considerations along those lines, though. So I want to go through the scenario of taking a record and syncing your device. That record is created, it's uploaded to the server, and then say it goes through a data flow. That record now exists inside of my record set. Now, in the event I have that record reassigned to a user and they fill out their form, they change it, they make the edits, and then they resync their device, and then they re-upload that modified record, that record is actually going to be another another item inside of the record set. So even though I have one record in Data Collector or an iForm Builder, it actually exists as two records inside of Dataflow. So it can be used as long-term storage, but I like to describe it more as a transaction log rather than a clean set of data that doesn't have any duplicates. So that's the main consideration there. In terms of running the data over and over again, because you have the data stored in each record set long-term, you are able to rerun the data. So you're able to emulate as if the data had just been submitted again through the data flow. But normally what we're trying to achieve here is after the initial setup, new records get pushed through automatically. So that's where the automation piece of Dataflow Automation comes in from. Now, that being said, we're fully aware that when you are starting up your data collection projects and you're trying to expand your data needs using Dataflow, that you will probably have old records that you need to import. You can do that. You can either do that through importing a CSV or a JSON file. What we normally recommend is that you do the trigger post-processing inside of your iForm Builder data tab. But either way, you are able to take legacy records and get them into your data flow. Think of that as like a one-time import though. After that's done, then once your flow is defined and the instructions are set up, everything should run seamlessly on a per record basis thereafter. MJ, are there any other questions I can answer?
No, John, that's everything for now.
Okay, awesome. So what I want to do now is we're going to go to another data flow. This one is going to become a little bit more complex, and I don't have any description around it. The reason I don't have any description around it is because, quite honestly, this structure of data flow I've used for multiple projects, and even though each individual action or configuration may be different, there are a lot of common principles that I can talk about using this data flow, and so that's what I wanted to do during this webinar. Now again, just like the other two, we have a single point of entry with my one webhook. Now what's important to know about a webhook is that because it's just an address, you can connect multiple forms to a single webhook. In fact, we see that happen quite frequently. We have customers sometimes where their data collection is not done on a single form. It's done over the course of 3 to 4 to 5 forms, and sometimes those are done in sequence. Sometimes they're done randomly in an ad hoc fashion. Either way, as long as the data can be standardized, you can connect every single one of those forms to one webhook, just like you can receive mail from multiple sources as well. Now from here, we do have this one record set, and you'll notice that there's no letter over it. There's no filter, any sort of refinement applied. This is intentional. The reason I like to do this is because this record set here does function as long-term storage, in my opinion. The way this works is you're not going to have any sort of refinements, any changes to the data made at this record set. So what I would be able to do is I'd be able to download my records from here at any point in which I need, and I have my original data effectively. Now from here, you'll see that the data flow branches in 3 different directions. The top direction as well as the bottom direction are going to have this magnifying glass icon. This is to reports, and again, reports is going to be our dashboarding software. Now what's great about this, and if you've worked within Excel or SQL, you'll realize that sometimes you need to have data in multiple tables, or you need to have data come in multiple formats, even though it's the same thing. In this particular scenario, I may have a filter or transform that's going to take all of my records and always send it to one main table inside of my reports. So this way, even in reports, I now have a master log. Building upon that, when you connect to reports, you're able to set up criteria, which is going to filter out some of the records to be sent into your reports table. In particular, I have done this quite commonly where I'll say I want to update or insert a row rather than always insert each time. Now what I do is I do the update based on the ID. So that means that if the record's ID exists already, let's do an update. If the record's ID does not exist, meaning that it's brand new, then we'll do an insert. This works towards the goal of having 100% data consistency and integrity between iForm Builder and your reporting tools. So I'm going to walk through another scenario here because I know I've run into it and I've seen other people run into it. And so hopefully this can relate a little bit. But if you've ever collected data in iForm Builder and then done a CSV download or an Excel download to then report on it, if you notice there's an error in the data, you'll say, oh, I got to make that change here. And you tend to make it in Excel. That's what I normally do. The problem is I have not fixed my original data at this point. Using Dataflow, what you can do is you can set up a Dataflow that will make sure your reports tables mirror your iForm Builder data tables. So what that means is when you add a new row in iForm Builder, you get a new row in reports. When you update a record in iForm Builder, you update that row in reports. And then the third step would be if you delete a row or a record in iForm Builder, you can do the same thing in reports as well. Having this consistency across your data is going to allow you to build tables, charts, graphs, and dashboards on top of that table in reports, and you can be confident that even as you change data in iForm Builder or Data Collector, your dashboards are going to reflect the proper things. That's another concern I've heard voiced from a lot of people is that they get all of this data that they want to use for business insights, but they're not sure they can trust it exactly. They're not sure that changes weren't made manually or not everything made it over. By having that synchronization between the two services, you're going to have a higher level of confidence about that. Now down in the second branch, I have a generic action object, and this is going to be, again, to either Data Collector or iForm Builder. This one in particular is to Data Collector. I just want to highlight the difference in the icon. You'll see that this both say record, but this one has the iForm Builder logo behind it, whereas this one has the Data Collector logo behind it. Now again, going back to anyone who is an advanced form builder or an experienced form builder, if you've worked with a technique called Smart Table Search, where you're able to look up previous records, you may have also run into this scenario where you want to be able to add to that Smart Table Search. You want to be able to add records to your lookup data. Well, I do this quite frequently inside of Dataflow Automation. So what I have here is, if I have a new record that I want to add to my Smart Table Search, I'm able to query and filter those records out, and then I have this action set up to add a new row to that form or to that table. This way what happens is my Smart Table Search will be updated next time I sync my device, and that new row will be selectable inside of my Smart Table Search pick list. Now just to expand on this idea, another request that we've seen come in recently and that I was actually very excited to try out and to succeed in doing is that sometimes you have a Smart Table Search and you want to remove things from it. And you can actually do that in Dataflow as well. So now this is starting to become a Data Collector / iForm Builder management tool, where if you have a particular record that has been filled out or chosen from the Smart Table Search, you can run it through a Dataflow and have that deleted from that set of records. So this is another really cool feature that you can use inside of Dataflow. And again, I think that it highlights the flexibility inside of the platform. But like I said, this was something that I had not done before and that was recently requested, and I got to try it out. I find that I'm continually challenged with different data problems that I want to try to solve using Dataflow, and the answer is never particularly clear, but that's because the problems are not simple either. These are complex, multi-layered problems or challenges, and they require a a clear guide in terms of the decision making and an ability to design an effective solution. Dataflow is going to allow you the space in order to customize your solution so that it fits your needs. Now, finally, this bottom branch, this is another cool thing that I've seen I do quite frequently, where I'll have a set of data and I may want it to go to one table or another table based on conditions. And in fact, given this screenshot, what I ended up doing was I run the data through a generic transformation, so I have this all standardized, and I can set conditions upon my action objects for each of these. So I may say, hey, if this inspection record passed, send it to this table. If the inspection record failed, send it to this table. And so this is going to allow you to take those decisions that normally need to be done manually and automate them inside of the data flow. This reduces the time it takes to sort out your records manually. It also allows you to have data sets that are already more apt to being manipulated and used to visualize data as a result. Now, MJ, are there any other questions? The next thing I wanted to do was go ahead and load up the Dataflow Automation service. But before I did that, I wanted to check in with you.
No, John, we're good here so far.
All right. So the next thing we're going to do, and this is actually the last thing we're going to be doing on this webinar today, is I want to log in here and show you what Dataflow Automation looks like. Now, we're not going to be building anything particularly complex. I'm actually going to be showing you the data flows that I have as screenshots here so that you can have a little bit more context around everything. So I want to start off with this data flow here. And there's a couple of things I want to highlight. The first thing is that this number above each of these record sets is the number of records included in that record set. So this has 5, this has 11. Your initial thought may be, well, hey, how come this record set has 5 and this one has 11? What happened to the other 6 over here? Well, this is actually the result of doing a data flatten. In this particular scenario, what we did was we had the group had a multi-select element where they could choose multiple options from an option list. And we used Dataflow Automation to take each one of those options chosen and turn them into their own record with all of the other ancillary data around it. So if we take a look inside of here, you'll see that we have something like Village 4, Lessons 2 and 3. Then when we go over here, if you look at the individual data, you'll see it just says Lesson 3, the date, and the village here. So I've both filtered and transformed my data in this respect. I've set it up in a way that it is integration ready. I only have the fields that I need in order to send them to a table in reports. And I want to go back to this data flow that we showed here where we're flattening these records. Now the next one, let's go ahead and take a look at this. If I load up my data flow, what you'll see here is this is my initial data. And this is going to be exactly what I get from iForm Builder. And it came in from this webhook. Now then what I'm doing in this step is I'm going to post-process my data. I'm going to run calculations. I'm going to be able to sort the records and the different items that were collected based on particular criteria. Now what's great about this is that criteria is set beforehand, and that means that any record that gets run through will be assessed against that criteria. Once that criteria is assessed and the record has been updated and the new properties added, I'm going to update my iForm Builder record, and I want to show you what this looks like. So I have a name for the action, and I have a connection to my iForm Builder account, and I say I want to update the record. Now I could also create a record, I could create and assign a record, or I could delete a record. I choose my profile ID, and from there I'm able to choose the actual form I want to select. Underneath, I have what's called a mapping field, and so these are going to be all of my data column names from a form, and then I get to map them to the property inside of the record. Now you'll notice that these are matching on a one-to-one basis, unit number, observers, observers. That was an intentional design decision on my end to make sure that they match all the way through. This makes it easier for me to connect all the dots. You'll see there's an extensive mapping here. And we even have elements where you may not want to map anything back. But then we do have these elements here where these were the derived values and I wanted to take that calculated value and assign it back to the record. Now I'm then going to update my record based on the ID. I need to say where the ID is coming from, and so I'm going to use this syntax, record.id, to say, okay, I want to go through the record, and we can take a look at a sample record. And based on ID, I want to find the record in my data collector table that has an ID of 24 and update it with these values. And so you'll see how this is a relatively long set of data. And it's not an issue with Dataflow. It's also able to handle the multi-structured or the multi-tiered structure of the data. Now over here we get to have our document action. This action is going to look very similar, where we are again choosing a document template, we're mapping our different fields, and then we're going to create that PDF each time. Now for a final workflow, I do have this here. This was actually a nutrition tracker that I made that I was using for a couple months. And what it's going to do is it's going to track my food intake, and it's going to store that in a table. It's also going to add new foods I've eaten to a smart table search, so I don't have to enter them in each time. And then I'm able to take only time data from each entry and set them up so that I can calculate what's called a fasting window for or how long I haven't eaten or how long it's been since my last time I've eaten. And so I'm again taking the data and transforming it in a way where it's going to be integration ready with the reports tables I have set up. So from here, let's go ahead and summarize what we've done. We started off by talking about the mismanagement of data management, talking about how a lot of organizations and people will turn to Excel or spreadsheeting software as a small scale solution, or they get bogged down working inside of SQL as a large enterprise scale solution, but that has such a high level of complexity, it becomes a very, very costly endeavor. Dataflow solves both of these problems. Working within Dataflow, you're able to set up an incremental Excel style setup for your problem solving where you're doing one thing at a time. It also has the benefits of SQL where you're able to have a scalable solution that can also be repeated. And what's best about it is that it can then be automated once everything is established. And finally, Dataflow Automation is going to be more flexible than either SQL or Excel because it allows for unstructured data. And again, that means data that is not going to be predefined and has a particular box it must fit into. Next, we talked about what a data flow is. We talked about some of the language, including things like webhooks, which are your mailing addresses, record sets, which are responsible for storing and refining data, whether you're talking about filtering it, transforming, or aggregating the data. And then finally, we distribute the data to another service. These are called actions. And these complete the other end of the data flow, establishing it as a data pipe from one service to another, or to multiple on the other end, in fact. Lastly, we went through 3 different sample data flows, ranging or increasing in complexity from a single linear data flow to one that's going to branch to multiple actions, to one that's going to branch to multiple paths, each with their own resulting action. And so you see as our data challenge increased in difficulty, the ability to scale with that in a data flow did as well. So my data flow was able to handle whether it was a simple problem or a more complex problem. Now I do have this last poll I'd like to launch. And the poll simply asks if you would like to schedule a call and learn more about Dataflow automation. This does not have to be a call about signing you up. It could be just an interest call if there are particular questions you have that are going to be around your own current workflow, your own current business needs. I'd be happy to sit down and talk to you about that. I know MJ would be as well, and so we'll be able to assist you in any way possible. While that poll is being answered, MJ, I wanted to check in for one last time if there were any questions that have been asked that I could answer.
Yes, John, there was one that came in, more of a clarification. What was the benefit of putting your JavaScript, your smart controls inside an object as opposed to inside the form?
Absolutely, that's a really good question. So, for those of you who have worked with forms before, where you're doing page level JavaScript, or you're having to pass values back and forth between parent and subform, or you may be doing a lot of like aggregations and a lot of dynamic values and a lot of those different complex things, you may or may not have run into some of these errors, because I know I've run into them quite frequently. You may have run into a difference between Android and iOS. You may have run into a caching issue where you're taking values from a previous record sometimes. You may have run into the fact that passing data up and down through the tree structure is very difficult, and that is very easy, and you're very prone to making mistakes. All three of those things are alleviated by taking that logic and putting it inside of Dataflow Automation. You're not working with different JavaScript toolkits based on the operating system. You have one standard toolkit you're using. You're also able to go to one place that's a little bit more flexible and make changes to it there. You don't have to worry about caching issues. You don't have to worry about having a particular structure within your form that you have to adhere to. So working inside of Dataflow is basically going to give you more options, and it's going to alleviate a lot of consistency pain points. I hope that answered the question.
That's perfect, John. Thank you.
No problem. All right. And I went ahead and closed that poll. Thank you, everybody, so much for answering it. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and close it out. Unless, MJ, did any questions come up between last time I asked you and when I just answered that last one?
John, just to confirm, we are going to send out the webinar recording. Is that correct?
Absolutely. You actually you read my mind. That's what I was going to talk about next.
Perfect.
So in the next 48 hours, you're going to be receiving a couple of different things. So the first thing is, if you are not a member on Zerion Academy, which is our learning management system here, you're going to be added to that. That's going to give you access to all the old webinars. It's going to give you a username that's going to be used for training materials such as certifications. I saw a couple people in attendance today who I'm going to be talking to tomorrow during the recertification. And then you're also going to be getting a PDF copy of this session along with an email that has a link to the recording of the session. All right, so I want to thank everybody for taking the time out of their busy day to come and join in on my talk about Dataflow Automation. And again, if you have any questions about it, reach out to us. We're always happy to help. And I will see you all next webinar. Have a good day. Thank you, everybody.